Ordinance D 2003-10. Mr. Spigelman.
Yeah, Marnin Spigelman, 11816 Harvard Lane, Carmel. I won't take up too much of your time while other people are waiting to speak here. First thing I'd like to talk about is an article that I read this morning in the Carmel Star about a call to accelerate the construction of the communication tower in Southwest Clay. Very briefly, I recall very distinctly that during the budget workshop, it was discussed that that communication tower was on hold for at least the next 3 years or so because there needed to be an overhaul of the system, and that various things had to be worked out from a hardware and software situation, including the increase of digital communication, especially one way and not the other. In the interim, I spoke to several individuals who were on top of the situation, who indicated, and agreed with the mayor, by the way, that it was not critically essential to build that tower at this point, that it's not an issue of who's going to pay for it. It's more of an issue to ensure the highest technological advances for that particular system. I happen to agree, and I think that if anything should be pushed right now in respect to increasing the public safety budget, it might be to urge the hiring of an additional 9 police officers that apparently are needed by the police department at this time. And that's all I have to say about that. And the other issue is Ordinance D 2003-10, which is a ordinance that is sponsored by Mr. Sharp in respect to transferring the food and beverage tax, a consumption tax, to directly into the fund that would be created for the Performing Arts Center. Now, I recollect that in the budget workshop at the time there was a controversy in respect to the mayor only allowing for $1 million in the budget for the grant to the Performing Arts Center. At that time, in that very unusual and rare circumstance where I agree with Mr. Sharp, I agree the fact that it was not within the standing of the mayor to question Mr. Libman, who had decided that $2 million was the minimum amount that was needed for the center. I, of course, agree with that as well, and I suspect that very much more than that will be needed in the long run. But contra to Mr. Libman's recommendation, the mayor held firm, at least at that time. But subsequent to then, I understand that he has raised the budget amount to $2 million. If that be true and confirmed, the question then I find myself trying to get an answer to is why this food and beverage tax ordinance is still under consideration by this council. Why? Because I was assuming that a major reason was to make up the difference of Mr. Libman's estimation for the Performing Arts Center next year. But apparently the increase of the budget by the mayor was not sufficient enough for Mr. Sharp to remove that from the agenda. At least I assume it's not going to be removed from the agenda. Now, I didn't quite understand this. I was looking at a budget that now has $2 million for the Performing Arts Center. $1.3 million potentially could be added to that if the food and beverage tax ordinance is passed. And together with $700,000 already allocated for support the art budget for additional entities, that amounts to a budget in support of the arts of $4 million, principally of residential taxpayer money for the Palladium. That represents roughly 5.7% of the budgeted 2011 budget, which is around $69.4 million, an unprecedented amount in any city in this country, any city. For example, Houston, Texas has a budget of 1.25%, certainly a city larger than us. Los Angeles, 0.25%. New York City, 1%, a cultural haven. And Baltimore, less than 1%. And Indianapolis has a whopping budget of $1 million. But yet Carmel could be looking at $4 million plus next year. So it begs the question, why is that so? Now, historically, back in 2005, when Mr. Sharp and Mr. Carter and others raised their hands in approval of the $80 million Performing Arts Center bond, the mayor said he was going to work on collecting $40 to $60 million. The last 5 years, it seems as though he's collected nothing, or virtually nothing, making this Palladium the only institution of its type in the United States that ground broke without a dime